they will respond faster. I mean, because they're having a harder time than we are. So nations will be fighting each other. The majority and minority people that are exploited most by the system will be the most active. It's not going to be smooth. I always said the transition will be the most painful thing up ahead, because just fighting for women's rights took a lot of battles, or giving them the right to vote, or getting rid of child labor in factories. You know, that took a long time. And when you have children working for you, you can maintain the competitive edge. If you have to pay a higher salary, you can't maintain the competitive edge. So if you free children, the factory goes broke because they can't maintain the competitive edge. All that industry wants to do is contain and maintain the competitive edge. And if they can't do that, they will use the Army and Navy. They control the Army and Navy, not the wealthy people.
Unfortunately, people aren't wise enough intellectually or emotionally to sit back and look at society and say what's wrong, where do we need to go in order to maintain a civilization and a future for us. We feel it will take the breakdown, as we talked about, and people losing their jobs, losing confidence in their elected leaders, and losing their homes before they'll start to look around and say, where do we go, what do we do? And even then, they won't know unless we have enough information out there to point this direction out to them. Because there really are no viable alternatives out there. It's back to God, or you know, back to the good old days, or law, civil law. So the job now, it's really critical to get this information out there while we still can.
I'll just add one more thing, and that's, someone brought this up last night, and it's completely in line with what you're describing, but it's another variation, is that earth ships, transition towns, these community things, these might be needed in a very short-term sense as things start to continue to break down.
Transition towns. Yeah.
Exactly, which is I have no disrespect for, but obviously they're not a solution. They probably recognize that.
Short-term solution.
Short-term solution, but what's going to happen is, say we all got together and we started a nice community somewhere. Say, I don't know, the number doesn't even matter, and it's outside the city of New York. Say, sure. And things start to break down, and we're doing great. We got our food grown, we're living decent.
Some chickens,
you know what's going to happen? Those people that are starving and displaced will come straight for whatever's working. That's just a natural tendency of any organism that's starving, and they'll do whatever they can. So unless you want to have men with automatic weapons at your gates, you know. So it's important that people not try to find intermediate patchwork solutions. We don't have time for that. I have friends that are doing right now. They're going to places and they're growing their own food because they're so tired of being poisoned by industry, and they understand what's happening. But I try to explain to them that that's not a solution. We have to work together. There's nowhere to hide, in other words. So
I think that's sort of how I feel. I'm kind of caught in the middle, you know.
Sure.
I could at any time drop off the grid, you know.
Sure.
I can grow potatoes in my houseplants. I know how to do it.
Sure, yeah.
I know how to remediate any kind of soil.
And that's good information to have.
Yes.
I certainly don't put any of that down. But if we want to change, we have to change the society. There's no way around it, especially with the growing population. I couldn't sit back, say, in my own little community village and just watch the death of billions of people, which I'm not saying is going to happen, but it's already slowly happening. And it can only get worse based on the outlook, the financial outlook, and everything that's happening with the scarcity that's being generated by this system.
How optimistic are you that we can do this?
It depends on what you define optimism. I think, as Jacque and Roxanne just pointed out, there's going to be a tremendous amount of suffering because, unfortunately, people are not really rational in any direct way. They have to feel the problem. They have to be hit with something. You can't just tell somebody that this is happening. And believe me, out of all the work I've done for the past few years and the things I bring up, you can't rationalize as somebody whose emotional identification is so strong with whatever idea that is fallacious. You have to wait for them to experience the problem. And that's an unfortunate reality.
What if they don't because we're so far gone?
I think eventually they will, though.
Well, this is the question, is that, so are we, it's going to, I think, and it sounds like from something you said last night, maybe you also think this way, it's going to go one of two ways. It's either going to completely collapse on its own, the thing, the system.
I can clarify
the
that.
money. Well,
That's happening now.
it's happening now.
It's
but
been happening for a long
But I
time.
guess what I'm saying is, like, will people do something before that in preparation, or will it just happen and then they're just all going to be standing there?
Most people are not going to have
And
anything.
most people, I don't think, are going to do anything.
No, they're
I
going
can
to...
until
only refer to the last
after.
depression,
Yeah.
the '29 crash. I remember the wealthy people that had yachts, had that yacht stacked with food. They were ready to leave the country.
Yeah.
If they succeeded, pirates would form of other people,
Right.
and they'd take their yachts away from them. You can't live to yourself anymore, only they don't realize it, even though they have guns on the boat. Once that happens, piracy is very hard to control. You generate thousands of people forming groups, invading co-op communities that don't want anything to do with the system, and they start co-op growth, and they're eating, so they will invade them. And if you have your own little farm, and you say, well, the hell with people, I'm growing my own chickens, I'm raising food for my family, they will invade your farms.
Right.
You can't live to yourself anymore. But knowing that will not cause people to come around and say that's logical and
Right.
reasonable. People are neither logical nor reasonable. They'll kill each other, take what they can, and form lots of gangs. I don't know whether we'll ever see the Phoenix Project. I don't know that. It depends on how many people can identify with it. They look to me and say, Jacque, when will you build these new cities? I'd like to move in. I said, it depends on what you do and other people. We have no power. We can only point to a direction. The only direction that'll save society, as I understand it, is to share all the Earth's resources, to remove all the artificial boundaries that separate people, and to bring in a resource-based economy where we share resources. If this comes about, where I can address the United Nations and point these things out, they're trying to set up a meeting to do that. If I can point out, if the nations join together now, before the collapse, the severe collapse, join together, share resources, they can maintain a degree of sustainability. Whenever people use the word sustainability, I say, for whom? The banks? Wall Street? Who do you want to sustain? If you want to sustain everybody, they're not interested. So they control the media, they control the press, the newspapers.
That's changing a lot, though. It's
Sure.
changing a lot, and I can
It
say
is.
that,
Well, we can see that.
you know, it's, I mean, they're also going to stop it. And I know this. I know this for a fact. They are going to shut it down. You know,
Well,
they're going to shut the
what's-
show down.
what's gonna-
What we do,
Sure.
they're not psyched. You know, what he
Oh,
does, they're
that's-
just not psyched that people are aware. You know, people who are
Oh, believe me, I completely
are
understand.
saying, you know, this shit has got to go.
Think about the
you know.
period like when you grew up, Jacque, when all you ever got was a newspaper about how the world worked. Complete controlled media. You had no outlet, even in no television. We have a very different world, and they've been doing their best to figure out how to try and continue their positions of control, just as any government does.
They will. I mean, net neutrality will go. You know,
Well,
it'll
we'll see what
go.
happens. The only problem with that is that there's so much money being made on the internet right
That's
now.
right.
It interferes with commerce.
That's right, and this is exactly why somebody like Murdoch and Jobs have decided to create their own daily paper.
Sure,
This is exactly why this is happening.
sure, sure.
There's no other reason for the merger of these two
Sure.
assholes, really.
One thing I wanted to comment, though, I'm sorry to interrupt you, on the point of breakdown before I forget,
Yeah.
is that a lot of people say, oh, well, when's the breakdown going to occur? I'm like, you've been
ongoing.
living through the breakdown for at least 40 years. The onslaught of more diseases, the onslaught of more poverty, the onslaught of more, well, not necessarily more wars per se, but the anticipation of many more wars, the onslaught of resource depletion, the onslaught of virtually everything, every life support system going into decline. This is what it is, and people just keep saying to themselves, as I've said, that's the way it is. You know, we have more starving people on the planet than ever before, and that's only going to get worse. It can't possibly get better. With what's happening right now, there's more debt. The only thing that's magnified this now is the debt collapse. That's really because it brings it to an optimized focus that the public still never would have thought of prior. And most people today still think we're going to recover. There isn't going to be an economic recovery from this point on if the monetary system game is adhered to. And that's what people need to understand
According
critically.
to America.
Well, globally, though, if the monetary system of the global market, which is what it is, I mean, the American philosophy has permeated, the virus of the cancer of capitalism has permeated the entire world. There's no one that can escape. Those that even claim to be socialist are just capitalists. I mean, to provide, say, free education, someone's paying for it. It's still being paid for. There's still money at every facet of motivation in the system. And one small aside that I want to just throw out there, and this notion of sustainability, I read a book recently, and they used the term sustainable business.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the most comedic thing I'd ever heard. It was written by this very prominent, wealthy environmentalist, and he was trying to explain how business can be sustainable. How can you possibly have sustainability in a paradigm, in an approach, where you have organizations in competition with each other that can't produce anything of high quality because of the need to have cost efficiency and preserve market share and cut corners at all times? How can you have sustainability when all industries are out for themselves and they're only worried about the resources and everything that relates to them, and they have no symbiotic or synergistic relationship to anything else? How can you have sustainability when they're obviously polluting and keep polluting on some level or another because it's framed in the network, it's framed in the context of the establishment, which means they have to cut costs. Framed in the context of the monetary system when they have to cut costs, so they can't possibly have output of efficiency, meaning you have to have landfills. No one can afford proper disposal. No one can afford to do all the things that are really necessary. No one can care about having sustainable goods, nor is it possible to have sustainable goods in order to keep the consumption going. So I laughed comedically when I was listening to reading this entire book on sustainable business, because it's completely relative. They make it a little bit more sustainable. They say, oh, we're going to recycle a few more things. His name is Hawken. Paul Hawken. He's a very famous economist / ecologist. Economist might not be the right word. And I have a great deal of respect for him, but he's trapped in the system. He's also well-to-do in the system. Like many different people that have these type of opinions, they're like, I have a great deal of respect for many different people out there. I'm not going to actually name any names because it might be misconstrued, but they don't go far enough. A lot of people that are praised as activists in ecology, they go just to the edge of the monetary system, but they're so indoctrinated they think the monetary system is a given, it's presupposed, religiously ordained.
And children,
Well, they're
literally
literally invested in it.
And they're literally invested in it, but that doesn't mean that they can't acknowledge it. Everyone has to make money in this system, but it doesn't mean you can't acknowledge it.
Who you featured in your film, Vertical Farming. He's a hero of mine. I love him. I
Absolutely.
think he's great.
Yeah.
I've had many exchanges with him, and he's really very inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
And the work that he does, and
Sure.
what he's done for a lifetime, dedicating his life to sort of the concept of vertical
Absolutely.
farming,
It's
which
very,
is
very important.
brilliant.
Yeah.
But all he's doing, at every TED conference that I see him at, and I go to every single TED conference there is, and at every TED conference, all he's really looking for is an investor. All he really wants is an investor to say, listen, let's convert Newark, the building in Newark, let's try this. But, he's not trying to profit, he is trying to feed the world. I mean, that's what he's trying to do.
I attempted to interview him. You're speaking of the individual at Columbia, right?
Dixon, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, Dixon. I tried to interview him, and he said, I'm sorry, I can't do any film interviews, because Sting has the right for all of my video interviews. And
It's true.
But I thought to
That's
myself,
true.
I mean, I don't know if that's good or bad, I have no idea.
It's bad, but he had to take the money from Sting because he needed to continue doing his work.
And I understand.
Funding was
And I don't put him down for that, but it just goes to show the nature of the system and how it automatically blocks everything.
He'll meet you face to face. I mean,
Sure.
we've had
You seem like a very nice guy. I'm not
the nicest
again,
guy and
sure.
really a great thinker.
Sure,
a great
absolutely.
thinker, but at some point, in his research years, when he was, he hit a wall, and
Right.
he had to keep going, and then there were these people who were, Sting is committed